Welcome friends to another Wheel of Time video. We're going to examine the life of Artur Paendrag Tanreall, later Artur Hawkwing, his rise from prince to ruler of an empire, and how he ran his kingdom. Historical spoilers for the novels, but nothing in the current timeline of Robert Jordan's books throughout. Let's get into it. Arthur was a royal prince. He was trained as a soldier and he became a captain in the army of the kingdom of Chandala. The small kingdom needed a well-trained army to provide protection from its bigger neighbouring kingdoms. Later in his life, forces advanced on Tyr, led by a false dragon, Ger Amalasan, and this false dragon defeated the forces the Aes Sedai sent against him, all except those of Arthur, who managed to escape or stalemate the false dragon each time. He had another name now, due to the speed his army moved at. Hawkwing, Artur Hawkwing. He captured the false dragon at the Battle of Jolvain. Near the climax of the battle, Hawkwing split his army into three, and this caused panic in the army of the false dragon, and in that moment, Hawkwing and the Aes Sedai charged with cavalry, and they were able to take the dragon and remove him from the battlefield, the Aes Sedai shielding the dragon's access to the One Power. But in doing this, Arthur broke a law that no army that is not controlled by the White Tower, the Aes Sedai's centre of power, can be brought into the area of Tar Valon without permission. The Aes Sedai leader gave the army 5 days to rest and leave the city, but when the city was attacked by forces still loyal to the false dragon, they asked again for Arthur's aid. He routed the false dragon's army, but the Aes Sedai leader was angered rather than grateful. Cymbarin, Tovar, and Kodamar later attacked Arthur's kingdom at the same time, saying he was a conqueror. In answer, Hawkwing kept winning fights, and the time became known as the Consolidation. When it ended, his kingdom covered an area from the Arith Ocean to the spine of the world, and from the Great Blight to the Sea of Storms. The last kingdom to fall was Aldershar. Arthur had the king executed when he surrendered, as Arthur believed the man was responsible for the murder of his wife and their 2 children. This was a shock, as he was known for being lenient even towards his enemies. The family of the dead king also had their titles taken from them. Years later, under his second wife, Hawkwing changed his mind on this. Despite suspecting their hand in the attacks on his kingdom, he welcomed Aes Sedai mediators and advisors into his kingdom. As High King, the world was held in his hands for 23 years, mostly peaceful, with some rebellions that were put down quickly, until an advisor came to his court called Jalwyn Morad. This new influence convinced Arthur to sack all Aes Sedai in his employ, and he put a price on every Aes Sedai who would not turn against the White Tower. What Arthur never learned, but what I will tell you, is that the counsellor's true name was Ishmael, and he was one of the Dark One's Forsaken, so you can see why he would try and turn Arthur against the Aes Sedai who opposed the Dark One. His counsellor in disguise might be linked to the deaths of his wife and children also. Arthur also sent armies to besiege Tar Valon. Whilst this happened, he died suddenly from an illness at the age of 82. With no heirs, this started a war that lasted 100 years. That was his life. What did this man build, though, during the making of his empire? How was it governed? Let's get into that now. The empire was divided into provinces. Hawkwing would appoint a governor to govern each of them. When it fit, he would use former rulers or their heirs to rule kingdoms that already existed, but they would rule places far from their homelands to prevent them building up power. The kingdom of Morena was maintained as it surrendered, and so was allowed to remain intact. Artur Hawkwing ruled over these provinces as High King, and he raised people into these provinces through merit. So a noble had to prove they could rule as they did in the military to get that position, and a commoner with great ability could take up high positions in Hawkwing's empire. And of course, as is normal in our world, once the conquering has been done, you need to build. Hawkwing built many great works, roads, new towns and fortresses to maintain his kingdom, and also militaries and police forces to reduce crime and banditry in his kingdom. The excellent roads would of course allow movement of goods between different places with merchants, and it would also allow Arthur to deploy an army quickly from one place to another, a very essential feature when your kingdom is so large. You need to be able to respond quickly with forces going to the right places. The empire's military forces combines soldiers from all kingdoms, making his army as potentially large as hundreds of thousands. Even during times of peace, the armies were kept both trained and motivated. The High King continued to promote via merit and kept fresh troops in different provinces. In later efforts to grow his kingdom, or perhaps to put down threats that he perceived to it, there was an invasion of the Aiel wastes. His forces suffered several losses to the Aiel's guerrilla tactics. They also chose not to fight the armies of Hawkwing in an open field. That would have suited him. The guerrilla tactics did not. Other factors against Hawkwing's armies was the terrain of the wastes and the climate which the Aiel would have adapted to long ago. The empire continued to have trade contact with the kingdom of Shara, and Hawkwing tried to invade them by sea. This army was led by one of his daughters, but his army was defeated and the fleet he had built destroyed. He also sent a son to conquer a continent belonging to the Seanchan, as they would be known. His son succeeded, but Arthur did not live to see this, nor his ancestors' eventual return. Upon his death, the cities of Caerhien and Tyr declared independence, and others quickly followed. His treatment of raising people on merit also had its own legacy, with the nobility during the War of the 100 Years, destroying every statue and memorial and removing his mention from every book that he was in, almost every book. But the people remember him and honour him still. Now friends, I turn this over to you. What do you think to the life of Artur Hawkwing? Was his downfall at the hands of Ishmael? Did you have your kingdom conquered by him and entered into his empire? Comment down below.